I'm with Ramachandra Guha, one of India's best-known historians, and of course, we know his several books on the Mahatma Gandhi. He's also written on cricket, on the Commonwealth, biographies on Verrier Elwin, and a book called The Cooking of Books, which I think is very different from cooking or food. And today we're talking about his latest book called Speaking with Nature. I'm going to lead close to the Zoom that we are on, the Zoom call. One of Mr. Guha's other passions on the environmental movement in India and across the world. So he has a series of environmentalists and people in history, Mr. Guha, that you've written about. So first of all, welcome to the Tribune. This is I'm in Chandigarh, you're in Bangalore, but Zoom connects us, which is wonderful. So you tell me why you wrote this book after the books that you've written on Mahatma Gandhi and Verrier Elwin. Actually, the Elwin biography is my own personal favorite. But why this book on the environment?
Thank you. My wife also thinks that the book I wrote on Elwin was probably the most credible and worthwhile of all that I've done. And Elwin meant a great deal to me, and I enjoyed writing that. But I actually came to political writing and biography rather late in my life and career, and partly through accident. My PhD, which was finished exactly 40 years ago, in 1984, as we speak, Jyoti, was a history of peasants and forests in the Himalaya and their interactions from the 19th century, culminating in the Chipco movement of the 1970s. And I really started as an environmental scholar. Then I lived for some time in America. I wrote comparative essays on Indian environmentalism, American environmentalism. Then I started collaborating with the ecologist Madhav Gadgil on Indian environmental policy, and we wrote a couple of books on that. And this particular book, Speaking with Nature, which is an intellectual history of early environmental pioneers, actually the research began in the 1990s. And I fully intend to go on with it and write up my research when Peter Strauss, who was then with Macmillan in London, asked me to write what became India after Gandhi. He said, the country's finished 50 years of independence, and why don't you look back at what's happened? All the books are about colonial India. So I started writing on contemporary India, then I got interested in Gandhi. And after a very long time, I came back to my first field of research, hopefully with a fresh eye, with new material, with maybe some more, a more mature understanding of Indian politics and society in which I could locate these thinkers. But in a sense, this is going back to where I began.
Right. Now, I'm not going to ask you, although it did strike me, this debate between environment and development. I will ask you that question later, but I do want to start with this quote that you have in your introduction by E.P. Thompson. And actually, Mr. Thompson or Dr. Thompson is somebody I did fleetingly meet as a young journalist. And, he was just this amazingly impressive character. And you quote him as saying, and talking about India, right, which is that it's this country of astonishing diversity of intellectual opinion, and I'm reading from your book, with a product of the country's size, cultural heterogeneity, and daring. Now, this is something that sort of provokes you into putting all these scholars together, but why have you picked these men and women?
So, in the course of one's research, looking for early pioneers, one stumbles upon different people, and reading about them leads you to a new set of people. And any work of this kind, which is a collective intellectual portrait of 10 individuals and their thought, more, not so much their life as their thought, right, and what they have to say about human relations with nature. There were a couple of other individuals I could have included. For example, one person I can mention here, who I almost included but didn't, was the great ornithologist Salim Ali, who I grew up in Dehradun in a very beautiful forested campus, reading Salim Ali. Salim Ali's The Birds of India. His first book was actually researched in Dehradun, so in the 1930s. But then I decided that though Salim Ali was a truly great ornithologist, N. Krishnan represented a more capacious understanding of nature. No one knew more about birds than Salim Ali. But M. Krishnan talked about plants, he talked about animals, he talked not just about big animals like tiger and rhinoceros, but about other vital, kind you could say, intermediate species like the black buck and the macaque. So if I was looking at someone to represent the wilderness wildlife end of things, and he's the one person in that book who represents that, Salim Ali still deserves a full-fledged scientific biography by a scientific ornithologist. So
Right.
then the other people, there was an Englishman who worked in Bengal called William Wilcox, and he wrote about large irrigation projects and the environmental problems they've caused, like soil salinity, waterlogging. And again, I was thinking of including him. So, but ultimately you have to write about people who make sense in the context of the overall structure of your book, and on whom you have enough original material. So there's, there has to be a balance, Jyoti. So there are 9 chapters. One is about a couple, the Harvards who did ecological agriculture. And each chapter is between 20 and 30 pages long.
Yeah.
Now, in a book of this kind, a collective biography, you can't suddenly add a chapter of 3 pages because that's all you have on an interesting figure. And that's the first thing. The second thing I'd say is every work of historical scholarship builds on what has come before and is an intervention in a debate which will be taken further by later scholars.
Right.
So if someone, as I said, Salim Ali is perhaps the most conspicuous absence in my book. I've tried to explain why he's not here. But some young, brilliant scholar will say, hey, I'm going to write a full book on Salim Ali and show that he's as interesting or as relevant as some of the other people Guha has profiled. So I think I'd like to think that each one of these figures is, say, wrote well, wrote with insight, with perception, and what they saw and wrote and commented upon speaks to us in the 21st century. Even though Tagore, who's the first figure in the book, is writing in the 80s and 90s, others are writing in the 1920s and 1940s. So there's a kind of contemporary relevance to what they say, So it's but again, no work of history is definitive. Even if it's 2,000 pages long, there's more to be said.
Okay, so very relevant is here, like we said. But, Madeleine Slade or Mira Behn, she seems to be one of your favorite women because you write about her a lot, not just in the Gandhi books, but also in the book on the Western thinkers. So why her? Why her as an environmentalist?
She's an utterly fascinating person, Jyoti. And, she has been assigned a role, almost a kind of Amar Chitra Katha kind of role in the Indian nationalist hagiography. In fact, there is a Amar Chitra Katha comic on her too. But here is this rich white woman who comes, touches Gandhiji's feet, and becomes his slave for the rest of her life. Now, that's not untrue. That's true. She was enchanted by Gandhi.
Even the Gandhi movie, if you remember, the Gandhi movie was also...
That's what it is. She comes to the Sabarmati ashram, takes a ship and then falls at his feet and okay. So it's a kind of it's a cool nationalist portrait, a rich white woman becoming the slave of a poor brown man kind of thing, right? I mean, not the literal slave, but the mental and psychological slave. But her life is much more interesting than that. I mean, in Rebels Against the Raj, the book on foreigners, I talk about how she fell in love. And with a handsome man from the Punjab, in fact, Prithvi Singh Azad, who was a revolutionary, and that didn't work out. Then she goes to the Himalaya, and then she becomes a pioneering environmentalist. So I think she's a very important figure in her own right. And like many remarkable women who happen to be attached to maybe even more remarkable men, she gets erased. For example, since we're talking about Gandhi, there is still, even now, there is no good biography of Kasturba Gandhi. Somebody is working on it now. I mean, I won't spoil the story, but a brilliant young Indian historian whose first language is Gujarati and who's a great archival scholar, she is writing a book on Kasturba Gandhi. Because it was always, and Kasturba Gandhi was a very unusual, interesting person. And even the story of how she worked with Gandhi, how she had to willfully suppress her own ideas because of Gandhi. So I think Mira Behn she's a very interesting, unusual person. And also the other twist to the story, which Attenborough doesn't tell you, or Charity, the Amar Chitra Katha comic about Mira Behn won't tell you, is that she comes to India in 1926, lives here in 1959, and then she's in the Himalaya, and she started in her youth as a concert pianist, and Beethoven calls her back. So she lives in India, in her late 60s, and goes back to Europe, where she gets involved in European environmental debates and telling them what to do, right? So it's such an interesting, unusual life. And I think her writings on forest, nature, ecology, sustainable agriculture are so deeply moving and relevant that although I've written about her in the past, I felt she had to be here too.
Yeah, she sounds like a woman that somebody can write a whole book on her, right? I mean, she's one of
Or
the
even or even a good or even a film in which Gandhi is a secondary character.
That's right. I think
That
that's
will be a real revenge on Attenborough. That will be a real revenge on
a good one.
Attenborough.
Absolutely. So listen, Mr. Dr. Guha, you write on Patrick Geddes. I didn't know about this man before. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah, yeah.
Geddes is
Get it,
this.
yeah.
But actually, this guy who really interested me was JC Kumarappa, who was Tamil Christian chap called JC Cornelius, who then changes his name. Tell us about him.
So, many of these people, or some of these people, are known to specialists. So, Patrick Geddes is known to town planners in India.
Yeah.
Kumarappa is known to Gandhian scholars. In fact, there's a very good biography of him by two young Gandhian scholars. But he's not really part of the general conversation.
Right.
And he is a economist. I mean, it's a very interesting story. So he's born in a Christian home. Like many Christians, Indian Christians took Christian names.
Yeah.
So he's Joseph Cornelius, JC Cornelius, goes to England and America to study and becomes interested in Gandhi in the 1920s while he's in America, comes back, joins Gandhi, Indianizes his name to Kumarappa, and because he's an economist, Gandhi makes him professor of economics at the Gujarat Vidyapeeth in Ahmedabad, which is the nationalist university Gandhi started.
Right.
And then Gandhi says, I want you to work at reviving the rural economy. So, which means, firstly, integrating agriculture with artisanal work. So Gandhi and Kumarappa start at All India Village Industries Association. So that in the lean season, farmers can, make baskets, they can do carpentry, they can make oil, and then sell it and be economically self-sufficient and not dependent on the city. And also on questions of common property management or water, forests. So his work, again, this is something quite interesting. His work in decentralized development, in promoting a kind of environmentally responsible economics, influenced E.F. Schumacher much later. So E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. If you look at the fine print, you'll see that, because Schumacher comes to India in the 1960s.
Oh.
And he doesn't meet Kumarappa because Kumarappa is on deathbed, but he meets people who talk about him and he starts reading him. And so there's a very interesting line of thought from Kumarappa to the ecological economists of today. Right. And again, these are, as I said, specialists know about him. There'll be a dozen scholars in India who know a great deal about Kumarappa, as they do about Geddes. But to bring him into the larger conversation, I think was important for me.
So he does feel betrayed when the whole Constituent Assembly is coming to being. Why? Why is that?
He feels that India should not have adopted a kind of heavy industry, energy, resource-intensive, energy-intensive model of development. That India should have really based its economic development bottom-up. He also was one of the first people, this is not here, there, I think it's briefly here in this book too. He said, when the government is sworn in, he says, we need a thriving voluntary organization, what we will now call civil society. Let people like Nehru and Patel become prime minister and home minister, but the other Gandhians who have a conscience, who work at the grassroots, have to mobilize the population to keep their leaders honest. So in a sense, he's anticipating what was to happen much later with the civil society movement of the 1970s and right down to today. And he is a dissenter. He's a difficult person. He perhaps, many original thinkers are not team players. They can't compromise their views. They can't compromise their ideas. But he's a very original man.
Okay, so this is my cue to bringing in and to asking you about Patrick Geddes, the town planner, and this whole sort of classic, industry versus environment debate. And India, as we see it today, 75 years on, I know you talk about the Chipco movement in your book, but, look at what's happening in the Himalayas today. A lot of that destruction of that ecology is apace. Now, and now, it's not in your book, but my question to you here is, and let me ask you this, what is it about the Chipco movement What is it about the people of the Himalayas that let them do the Chipco in 1973, and today you don't have that similar sort of passion?
I think that's a very good question. I think Chipco was a part of this Gandhian grassroots movement. I mean, the people, the early leaders of Chipco, Chandra Prasad Bhatt and Sundarlal Bagona, had been influenced by people like Jayaprakash Narayan, working in the grassroots. They recognized that forests were vital to the rural economy. And the destruction of the Himalayan forests to meet the interests of the paper and plywood factories, but was not just economic injustice to the peasants, but was causing soil erosion and floods in 1970, which is when you and I were little children, so we don't have no memory of this. In 1970, there was a major flood caused by deforestation and soil erosion, which in the Ganga, which affected Haridwar and even many miles downstream of Haridwar. And I think so what Chipko was trying to say was social justice and environmental sustainability are interwoven. They are inseparable.
Right.
We need to conserve the Himalayan forests. We need to maintain its biological diversity so that, it safeguards the water resource of the Himalaya. It puts a brake on soil erosion, and it assures local communities a steady source of fuel wood and fodder and medicinal plants which they need for their survival. Now, of course, as with Nehru in the 1950s, with the 1990s, with economic liberalization, there was an enchantment with more growth, more consumption, except that this more growth and more consumption is not directed by the public sector, but by the private sector. And some of this is, of course, necessary. I think some amount of freeing of the control of the economy from the clutches of the state was necessary. Right. But the market can't take care of environmental responsibility. Now, that's one thing. The other thing is the Himalayas are a very fragile ecosystem. Right. I'll just give a simple example for your viewers. The forests of the Himalaya are very much like the forests of the Alps. There are basically two kinds of species. Coniferous species, which are evergreen, like the pine and the fir and the spruce, and broadleaf species, such as oak, beech, hornbeam, and so on. Now, that's generally there's mixed species composition. Now, in the Alps, if you clear an oak forest, slowly it will regrow, or a pine forest.
Right.
But in India, if you clear a forest, the monsoon will come, because in the Alps, rainfall is evenly distributed all through the year, rainfall or snowfall. Here, it all comes in 2 months. So all the soil will go off and there'll be massive floods. Right. Now, and it's a very young mountain chain. So building roads has to be done with great care. I mean, the Char Dham project is an absolute disaster. The Supreme Court was very unwise to pass it. There was a report written by a team of scientists led by Dr. Ravi Chopra, which had the most fantastic visual documentation of the destruction of the landscape and of the lives of people by overextending the roadway. Not long ago, we had this tragedy about the tunnel. And near Uttarakhand.
Joshimath. In Joshimath. Joshimath.
No. Joshimath was sinking. Two things. Joshimath, the town was sinking. That is in the Alaknanda
Valley. The Silkyara tunnel. The Silkyara tunnel.
That was in the western catchment in the Bhagirathi near Uttarkashi. Yes. So all of this, more and more of this will happen. And with climate change, this is unexpected. Whether the glaciers are drying up. So, and now, of course, with Sonam Wangchuk and his colleagues March and Fast, even Ladakh is coming to the picture. So I really wish, Jyoti, I just say one thing. The disregard of environmental safeguards, the arrogant belief that man, and I advisedly use the word man rather than humans, man can tame and conquer nature by his brilliance and his technology. These are beliefs shared by every political party in India. The BJP, the Congress, every regional party. If you look at the Western Ghats, which are as important to us as the Himalaya, as ecologically fragile, and how all the governments, from the communists in Kerala through the DMK in Tamil Nadu up to the BJP in Goa and Maharashtra and the Congress in Karnataka, have been just ravaged those mountains and people, and not just people today. Human beings unborn will pay the price of this devastation.
So let me bring in K.M. Munshi here, who you call the Hindutva historian. And the reason I'm bringing him in here now at this point of the conversation is because the BJP, which, and Prime Minister Modi, very devout person, and we remember how he prayed in Kedarnath, and he was there for a few days. Now, this sort of connection between Hinduism, Hindutva, and the BJP, and what we talk about the destruction of the Himalayas, how are you fitting this in with K.M. Munshi, the Hindutva?
So, my book, I mean, our conversation is talked about the present.
Yeah.
But my book is really about the past. And
Right.
every reader will draw lessons from it as to how
Sure.
it informs his or her understanding of the past and what action needs to be taken. But K. Munshi is a very interesting character because in some ways, Munshi and Tagore are similar in that they're both known for their writings and their institution building. And in the case of Munshi, of course, for his legal work. But they were also, in different ways, pioneering environmentalists. I think Tagore, I show, had a more holistic understanding of what nature and environment meant.
Right.
But when Munshi briefly was forest minister in Nehru's cabinet, he hit upon this idea of Vana Mahotsava, an annual festival of tea planting. And he invoked the imagery of the Hindu epics of Krishna, and the groves around Vrindavan and Mathura, and tree planting being approved of in our religious scriptures. So he's an interesting character. Now, I don't know, firstly, neither Prime Minister Modi nor Amit Shah, who have both read the Home Minister, who have both read Munshi's novels, are going to read my book. But if they were to, or if some of their secretaries were to read their book, they might find an interesting dimension to Munshi that has escaped them.
But, explain this to me, Dr. Guha, and I'm not talking about the Hindutva-vadis or the leftists, but this sort of dissociation between the past and the present, it's almost like a fracture, right? The epics or the scriptures talk about, the why you must protect the trees and the rivers and the forests. But somehow, although we pray to all these gods and goddesses, but somehow we don't seem to implement that. So how do you explain this fracture?
No, it is, I think, there's a great deal of symbolism and shadowness in the practice of faith, all faiths. I mean, it could be, Hindus would say there are scriptures that the Ganga is holy, but look at the state of the Ganga anywhere down, from Hardwar right up to Kolkata, look at the state of the Ganga. I mean, no river has more human and animal waste in it. So, I mean, hypocrisy is sanctimony and hypocrisy are intrinsic to many people of faith. I mean, it will be true of Christians, it will be true of Muslims, it will be true of Hindutva people, it will all be true of Marxists. It will also be true of Marxists, and many of our Marxist intellectuals, and there'll be a disjunction between how they live and what they preach. So, but I'm not, I said, this book is really driven by a curiosity about the past. It's about uncovering interesting original thinkers who said things that have led buried and obscure, which I've tried to uncover and make visible, and begin a conversation on essentially the importance of environmental thinking in understanding India's past and how that might also inform how we negotiate and navigate the future.
So how does Rabindranath Tagore, who you begin the book with, how do you look at that? Does he, this curiosity that you have of the past, of environmentalists about the past, how does he fit in?
So Tagore, again, is, he's as I say, he's a myriad-minded man. Yeah. And if at all people have looked at his environmentalism, it's only been the aesthetic side. He is writing about his love for a particular tree or a particular mountain range, or his first view of the snows when he goes to Himachal. But I show that there are many dimensions to Tagore's environmentalism. There's a deep aesthetic appreciation of the beauty and variety of nature. That's the aesthetic dimension. Then there's the educational dimension, making interaction with nature part of everyday teaching in his school, part of Bhavan and in Shantiniketan, long before environmental education becomes part of the high school curriculum here or anywhere else. Right. Then there is a kind of a political side. There is an economic side where he's talking about how unregulated industrialization all the jute factories in Kolkata and how they destroy the environment and
Right.
lead to serious problems for the villagers living downstream who don't have access to clean water and fish stocks and so on. Then there's a political dimension where he's talking about British colonialism as a system of ecological exploitation. Not just political domination, but ecological exploitation. And then finally, there's a prophetic dimension. There's a lecture of his I quote, from 1922, which he gave at Srinivasan, where he says, if our greed and consumerism continues, he imagines what will happen to the planet. I mean, there's some very vivid, since he was a writer, there's some very vivid descriptions of gouging out the earth, fouling the air, polluting the water, and so on. So and again, because he did so many things, that aspect of his work, I think, has been underplayed. I mean, you remember him for his poetry, for writing our national anthem, for starting Shantiniketan, for influencing Gandhi and Tagore, for traveling around the world. But I think his environmental writings are multifaceted and are very rich, very deep, and also prophetic.
So the other Bengali, Radha Kamal Mukherji, whose chapter is, and you talk about him, and you say that a lot of his work is an exaltation of the village order. Now, I'll ask you about that, but I'll also ask you about the pamphlet that he wrote on Pakistan. But let's start with.
So I did like Kumarappa, many of these people. So Mira Behn, who figures in this book, Kumarappa, and Radha Kamal Mukherji were interested in renewing and reviving the village economy so that peasants were encouraged to work cooperatively and to manage their water, their pasture, their soil, their fodder more carefully and with a view to the long term. They were also interested in reducing the exploitation of the village and its resources by the countryside. For example, I live in Bangalore, and large city growing. Where do we get our water from? From the countryside. A city, the technical term for this, which is used in the environmental literature, is ecological footprint.
Okay.
The ecological footprint of Bangalore, or the water footprint of Bangalore, extends to the Charavati River in the Western Ghats. Right? So they were talking about that too, But I think the real importance of Radha Kamal Mukherji in this book and to India and the world today is that he was an interdisciplinary thinker. All of us those of us who have studied in the universities will remember that from very early on, in fact, high school, there's a separation between art and sciences. You go here or you go there. Supposing you go into either, then you specialize in one discipline within the arts. So if you do history, you don't talk to literature or to political science or to sociology. If you do physics, you don't talk to chemistry or to biology or to whatever else, right? Mathematics. So Radha Kamal Mukherji was saying to understand human nature is indivisible.
Right.
And once you think in society and its interaction with nature, you need, firstly, social science and natural science to collaborate. And within the social science, for the economists to understand sociology and history and politics and culture. So there's a buzzword today, holistic thinking. And holistic thinking is really important, particularly for understanding human interactions with nature, because you look at all at society, all at nature and its interactions. And Radha Kamal Mukherji's real significance in this book is that he's the first person anywhere, first academic anywhere in the world to call for a closer integration of natural science and social science with a view to tackling our environmental dilemmas more effectively. But he says other things like about Pakistan. He argues, as we say, that Pakistan would not survive because the whole area is, the rivers and also the markets. Jute is grown in East Bengal but processed in West Bengal. So
fascinating.
He made because it's called, his pamphlet is called An Economist Looks at Pakistan. So he wrote it in 1944 when people were arguing that India had to be one for moral reasons, for political reasons. Right. Hindus and Muslims had to cultivate brotherhood. We couldn't, and so on. But he actually gave an economic and ecological argument. Of course, it was unavailing because the country was divided. But I thought that was quite an interesting,
fascinating guy.
Thought and novel take on the partition debate.
Absolutely, really fascinating guy. And I know you're running out of time, Dr. Guha, but just a couple of more writers left. Patrick Geddes, let's get back to him. I've asked you this a couple of times. Why is he so important?
So he is important because I talked about the ecological footprint of Bangalore. So he is important because he is saying, so again, I said that some of the thinkers in this book, particularly those influenced by Gandhi, like Mira Behn, Kumarappa, and Mukherji, said that the economic future of India rests on reviving its village economy. And many of these thinkers had a kind of distaste for city life. They didn't like city life. Now, what Geddes is saying is, whether you like it or not, city life is here. India was not, Mahatma Gandhi said, India lives in her villages, but Geddes is saying India has lived historically in her cities too, from a very long time. Look at Banaras, look at Hyderabad, look at Ahmedabad, then the colonial cities like Bombay, Kolkata, Delhi, and Delhi, of course, is an ancient city too. And he said India will become more urbanized. You can't stop it. But you can make city planning, city life more environmentally responsible, more socially just, and so that's what he's talking about. So he's telling, and particularly where we are today, where the city really, India will soon have the largest urban population in the world. So how do you reduce the ecological footprint of the city and the countryside? Can you find the vital natural resources for everyday life within the precincts of the city? How do you organize a system of transportation, of housing that is environmentally sustainable and also socially just, where the poor are included? How do you talk about decentralization? So he talks about decentralization. Now, one of the real problems in India today is that the 73rd and 74th amendments, which were supposed to mandate political decentralization for villages and for municipalities, are totally inoperative, ineffective, because there are no teeth to it. You elect a panchayat or a municipality, but the mayor or the sarpanch has no powers. The powers are still in the state capital, Bangalore, or in the national capital, Delhi. So he said political decentralization, where people take local communities take decisions about their own lives. That's the only way you'll get responsible stewardship of nature, because you will feel connected. You'll feel responsible. So I think Geddes is very important for all these reasons, and because he's talking about the city. Many of the other thinkers are talking about environmentalism, environmental sustainability, social justice in the countryside, or in the case of Elvin, tribals. So Geddes is important because he recognized that India would, whether Gandhi liked it or not, India would become also an urban, culture. And the question was, would our cities be habitable? Would they be environmentally sustainable? Would they be inclusive in their governance? Or would they just be, uncaring about all these things?
Right. And we have only a couple of minutes left on the Zoom call, Dr. Guha, but I have to ask you about your dissenting scientists, Albert and Gabriel Howard.
Yes, they were, it's an extraordinary love story too, because, here is Albert Howard, studies in botany in Cambridge, falls in love with a younger botanist who also studies in Cambridge. They come to India, work with the colonial agricultural service, and then are disenchanted and then move to working with the princely state of Indore. But they are pioneers of two things. One is, I talked about interdisciplinary approaches.
Right.
Mukherji. They are also interdisciplinary scientists. If you look at agricultural science, there are many compartments. Somebody studies the soil, somebody studies the plant, somebody studies the water, somebody studies the application of fertilizers. And they're saying you have to look at it as an integrated whole. And they also are important because they're the first people to warn against the dangers caused by the overuse of chemical fertilizer. And actually design a system of organic agriculture known as the indoor method of composting, which is still practiced in several parts of the world, not so much in India. But again, they're showing a path. Look at what's happening to Punjab today, right? They also talked about water saving, about encouraging peasants to be more appreciative of the need not to overuse water. And again, like Patrick Geddes, they are democratic in their orientation. They're not arrogant. They're not saying, I, the scientist, will teach the peasant. They're saying, no, I will collaborate with the peasant. I will use their knowledge, their understanding, and with the use of science, take it to another level. So I thought they were also, and again, because it's a very striking story of a couple united by their love for each other and their devotion to science.
Lovely. That was really lovely, Dr. Guha. And I'm going to hold up your book again, once again, for all the viewers of the Tribune. Speaking with Nature. It's a HarperCollins imprint. Thank you so much for your time. And, you know, Punjab, you talked about Punjab. It is sitting on an environmental time bomb, sometimes I think, but about that another time. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks.